Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I pray you're well. This is something I'd like to try out and let's see how it goes. Initially, it's going to be just a mess, but you have to start somewhere. I want to see if we can do this on a nightly basis if possible, but at least once every couple of nights where I come on and I share with you something that I've been reading and just comment on it a little bit and just share some thoughts. This is something that I do regularly at Al Andalus Academy with Al Andalus Book Club members, where we have a book list and we go through. Uh, by the way, if you're not familiar, Al Andalus Book Club is something that I started about 7 or 8 years ago. There are book lists and recordings and webinars and sessions and all of that you can find in the links in the description. But I thought I would do something that's a little bit more unstructured, where I just come across something that I find interesting. And for this particular series, if it becomes a series or set of videos, this could be Arabic text, it could be English text, it doesn't matter. But I thought it's just something that, hey, you know what? We have this opportunity to do this, and maybe I'll share something with you. And if you have questions, if you have commentaries, if you have thoughts, please comment for the algorithm, as they say. So comment, let me know what you think of this. I think it'd be interesting. I hope it is, anyways. Um, so at any rate, I'm reading this book right now, or I'm rereading this book, sections of this book. I found this book quite profound. Atul Gawande's Being Mortal. And the subtitle of it is Medicine and What Matters in the End. And the reason I'm rereading this right now is because I'm coming across a set of patients in the hospital, um, where looking at their condition and their comorbidities, how they're basically artificially kept alive and ticking, one wonders what is best for that patient. There's this idea in medicine, or maybe it's unstated, but it's certainly implied, where we focus on quantity of life. I care more about how long you live and prolonging your life and pumping you with whatever medications that I can give you to keep you alive, versus what kind of quality of life do you have? One of the first discussions that we have with patients when they come into the hospital is goals of care, is what we call it. Resuscitation status. Are you a goals of care? Are you at the highest order where I can jump on your chest and do CPR if you need it? Or is it in your best interest in terms of quality of life and recovery that you are not for CPR and you are not for intubation? Potentially you're for consideration for ICU support if you need it, if it's for something that is reversible. Should I just allocate you for comfort measures, IV fluids, just keep you comfortable? Or are you just flat out a palliative patient? This is one of the first conversations we have. But oftentimes, what you find is with a lot of patients who end up being categorized as the highest goals of care, this is somebody that you'd want to jump on. Sometimes we see it's a patient who is 85 years old, 90 years old, frail, um, really towards the end there of their life. And yet the families, it's not even the person. Oftentimes this person could be demented, they have dementia, they have whatever other morbidities that basically robs them of their capacity, their intellectual capacity and insight. And the family is the one who actually decides, no, 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 do everything that you need to do. So, anyways, it's sometimes when it can be troubling to see that, and at the end of the day, it's still a medical decision. So, whilst we do have the conversation with the families, if we do not believe that it is in the best interest of the patient, or the treatment is completely futile, despite the protestations of any family members, you can, as a physician, decide, look, I'm not going to do this. This is just going to be causing undue harm and suffering, and it is not bringing any benefit. And so, no, we're not going to go ahead and do this. At any rate, this in this text, there is a chapter titled Letting Go. And Atul Gawande says on page 155 in this version, in the past, when dying was typically a more precipitous process, we did not have to think about a question like this. Though some diseases and conditions had a drawn out natural history, tuberculosis is the classic example, without the intervention of modern medicine, with its scans to diagnose problems early and in its treatments to extend life, the interval between recognizing that you had a life threatening ailment and dying was commonly a matter of days or weeks. Consider how our presidents died before the modern era. George Washington developed a throat infection at home on December 13th, 1799, that killed him by the next evening. John Quincy Adams, Millard Fillmore, and Andrew Johnson all succumbed to strokes and died within 2 days. Rutherford Rutherford Hayes had a heart attack and died 3 days later. Others did have a longer course. James Monroe and Andrew Jackson died from progressive and far longer lasting and highly dreaded tubercular consumption. Ulysses Grant, oral cancer took a year to kill him, but as the end of life researcher Joanne Lynn has observed, people generally experienced life threatening illness the way they experienced bad weather, as something that struck with little warning, and you either got through it or you didn't. Dying used to be accompanied by a prescribed set of customs. Guides to Ars Moriendi, The Art of Dying, were extraordinarily popular. A medieval version, published in Latin in 1415, was reprinted in more than 100 editions across Europe. People believed death should be accepted stoically, without fear or self pity, or hope for anything more than the forgiveness of God. Reaffirming one's faith, repenting one's sins, and letting go of one's worldly possessions and desires were crucial, and the guides provided families with prayers and questions for the dying in order to put them in the right frame of mind during their final hours. Last words came to hold a particular place of reverence. These days, swift catastrophic illness is the exception. For most people, death comes only after a long medical struggle with an ultimately unstoppable condition: advanced cancer, dementia, Parkinson's disease, progressive organ failure, most commonly the heart, followed in frequency by lungs, kidney, liver, or else just the accumulating debilities of very old age. In all such cases, death is certain, but the timing isn't. So everyone struggles with this uncertainty, with how and when to accept that the battle is lost. As for last words, they hardly seem to exist anymore. Technology can sustain our organs until we are well past the point of awareness and coherence. Besides, how do you attend to the thoughts and concerns of the dying when medicine has made it almost impossible to be sure who the dying even are? Is someone with terminal cancer, dementia, or incurable heart failure dying exactly? I was once the surgeon for a woman in her 60s who had severe chest and abdominal pain from a bowel obstruction that had ruptured her colon, caused her to have a heart attack, and put her into septic shock and kidney failure. I performed an emergency operation to remove the damaged length of colon and give her a colostomy. A cardiologist stented open her coronary arteries. We put her on dialysis, a ventilator, and intravenous feeding, and she stabilized. After a couple of weeks, though, it was clear that she was not going to get much better. The septic shock had left her with heart and respiratory failure, as well as dry gangrene of her foot, which would have to be amputated. She had a large open abdominal wound with leaking bowel contents, which would require weeks of twice a day dressing, changes, and cleansing in order to heal. She would not be able to eat. She would need a tracheostomy. Her kidneys were gone, and she would have to spend 3 days a week on a dialysis machine for the rest of her life. She was unmarried and without children, so I sat with her sisters in the ICU's family room to talk about whether we should proceed with the amputation and tracheostomy. "Is she dying?" one of her sisters asked me. I didn't know how to answer the question. I wasn't even sure what the word dying meant anymore. In the past few decades, medical science has rendered obsolete centuries of experience, tradition, and language about our mortality and created a new difficulty for mankind: how to die. This is such a profound passage. I'm actually going to transcribe it and put it up on my Facebook just to keep a record of it somewhere so that I can refer to it again. Um, I mean, it's just fascinating the way that people will want anything and everything. There was a patient that we had. He was an elderly gentleman in his 80s. He had a fall. This man, with at his old age, with a subdural hemorrhage, somebody decided that in the family that no, 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 you need to do everything you can. And so the neurosurgeons went in and intervened, and they put in a shunt, and they drained, and they did an evacuation and a craniotomy and all of that. And then this patient was, and by the way, this guy, the fall was, I don't want to go into specific details just for the patient privacy, but it was quite a catastrophic fall. He was never the same afterwards. He never really came back and came through. He remained in the hospital for another 6 months afterwards, during which time there was no dignity, there was no awareness, there was a lot of, let's call it trauma to this individual, um, who was not there, was not present there anymore. And the family that decided that they wanted him to stay there, they hardly ever visited him anyways. So instead of having a, you know, a swift death, let's say, a dignified funeral, unfortunately for him, he ends up dying in hospital, unaware of his surroundings. Is that really what matters? You look at the way that there was a study done a few years ago, and I don't want to butcher the details, but if I recall the conclusion correctly, it showed that patients with advanced lung cancer, non-small cell lung carcinoma, if they opted for, I think it was stage 3, stage 4, if they opted for palliative therapy instead of active chemotherapy, curative chemotherapy, those patients had better quality of life, and they outlived their counterparts who went for the curative chemotherapy by 6 months. They were at home, they were with their families, they were more comfortable, and they had a better end. Um, Not everything that is offered to you in the hospital by doctors, in terms of what interventions they can offer, is something you should go for. Informed consent, I think, is can only be fully informed as if you are fully educated on what is to come and what to expect, and ask yourself, would you want that for yourself? Would you want to be lost, demented, um, unaware of your surroundings, delirious, um, you know, incontinent? I mean, it's just an interesting way that we do things nowadays, that in the past they didn't have to deal with. And also, it prolongs grief for the family. You know, the person is no longer there, so they can't really, so they want to grieve, they want to mourn their loss, but because they're physically still there, they're stuck in limbo, and they can't really fully have closure until the person passes away. Anyways, this is the first time I do this, so it's a little bit clunky, it's a little bit wonky. Um, but I thought, gotta start somewhere. So I hope this makes you think about this in some way. I'm wondering what you guys' thoughts are about this. Personally, I think there's a limit that one should accept for what they expect from interventions in medicine. And once your quality of life deteriorates to such a degree that your dignity and your honor is breached, that you're no longer aware of yourself, that your struggles are so significant, that you're just really just artificially kept alive because your organs are functioning, but you're not there anymore. I think that's the point where you probably have gone too far. What else would you guys like me to go through? I'm going to be reading from a variety of texts. This is going to be an open forum. But if you want something structured, Al Andalus Academy, the links are in the description. I have a weekly halaqa. We're going through the Book of Illumination, Kitab al-Tanwir fi Isqat al-Tadbir by Sayyid ibn Ata'illah. We have finished the Hikam. That took me about a couple of years to go through. So the Hikam is done, translation and commentary. That's available in Andalus Academy. I'm also going through Ibn Ashir, Maliki Fiqh. Just began this week. So for those of you who want to brush up on your fiqh or study fiqh, Maliki fiqh with me, you can go through Al-Andalus Academy as well. Again, the link is in the description. With that, I'll leave you. Keep us on your dua. We'll catch up next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.